Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder Walking Tour. Today we're headed to the old Cowtown Museum in Wichita, Kansas. The old Cowtown Museum is a living history museum that will transport us back to the 19th century and offers a vivid portrayal of frontier life in the Old West. Spanning across about 23 acres along the Arkansas River, the museum features over 50 historic as well as recreated buildings including homes, businesses, and farms, all meticulously restored and furnished to reflect the 1860s to 1880s here in Wichita, Kansas. As we stroll through these dusty streets, we can explore a wide range of exhibits that will bring us back past to the life with demonstrations including blacksmithing, printing, and other period trades. The museum also showcases the diverse cultural heritage of the region from the Osage Nation to European settlers and highlights the economic activities that shaped Wichita's early growth, such as cattle driving along the Chisholm Trail, hunting, and trading. Our tour begins well before Wichita was founded with the Native Americans that once lived in this area. The Osage Nation, known as the People of the Middle Waters, are a Midwestern Native nation along the Great Plains. They originated in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys and later settled across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Dominant in the region, they relied on nomadic buffalo hunting and agriculture. The land on which Wichita was built was owned by the Osage Nation by treaty. As the perception of this land's value shifted from being the great American desert to the future breadbasket of the nation, the U.S. government sought to relocate the native nations once more to a new Indian territory, now the state of Oklahoma. The Wichita Nation inhabited the area that became the city of Wichita as early as the 1500s. By the 1860s, they had been driven south to northern Texas by other nations. During the Civil War, Native Americans chose sides, hoping for a better deal from the Confederates. The Wichitas sided with the Union and were moved to the future site of Wichita for their protection during the war, only to be relocated back to Indian Territory afterward. The city took its name from this Native American nation. One of the first structures we're going into is the Heller Cabin. This cabin represents a trading post that would have been used by town founders like J.R. Meade and Dutch Bill Griffenstein. Their activities marked the roots of pre-railroad Wichita, where hunting, trapping, and trading with Native Americans were the primary economic ventures. The buffalo hunter and trader was a key figure whose business not only paved the way for future developments, but also overlapped with the cattle and farming economies that later built Wichita, Kansas. As we leave the Heller Cabin, we're now heading into the Cowboy Camp section. This represents the trail home for cowboys as they drove their most valuable commodity, cattle, to Wichita. After the Civil War, beef stocks in the East were exhausted from feeding soldiers on both sides, creating a demand for a new supply. The Texas Longhorn, with its roots in Spain, had reproduced rapidly during the war. Despite its lean and stringy meat, it was beef, and that's what the public demanded. With no rail system in Texas, the only way to transport them east and west was by trailing them north overland to connect with the railroads. The fever to acquire a railroad and become a railhead for Texas cattle spread throughout the southeast and south central part of Kansas. Wichita joined this drive, hoping the Santa Fe Railroad would come through the area. The cattle trade provided an economic bridge between the existing hunting and trading activities and the developing farming economy. However, delays in settling land ownership meant the railroad, which had wintered in Newton, Kansas, about 20 miles north of here, had to push west to meet the state deadline. Wichita and Sedgwick County citizens passed a bond issue to fund their own railroad with Santa Fe's help to connect to Newton. Once the rail link was established, cattle drives could save 90 miles by going to Wichita instead of Abilene, Kansas, and 20 miles compared to Newton. For 4 years, Wichita became a booming cattle town, generating profits for businesses and limiting city taxes. Cowboys driving cattle from Texas to Wichita were a diverse group. Most were white men, some with direct involvement in the cattle. Mexican vieros, part of a long Spanish tradition of cattle working, joined newly emancipated slaves. These former slaves, skilled from their time in bondage, now found relative prestige as well as equal pay. There were also many Native American cowboys from the Southwest, some with herds in Oklahoma. At night, cowboys would bunch the cattle together and sing to them while riding in opposite directions to prevent stampedes. Any disturbance could spook a herd, risking injuries to cattle and cowboys and causing cattle to lose up to 50 pounds of valuable weight. In addition to natural hazards like heat, wind, and lightning, cattle drives faced hostility from homesteaders whose fields were trampled, and longhorns infected local herds with what was called Texas tick fever. Our next stop on our tour is the Trapper's Cabin. This cabin represents a vital aspect of the hunting and trading economy that laid the foundation for early Wichita. Trappers often used traps instead of guns to hunt for fur-bearing animals and were an integral part of this economy. This trapper's cabin is interpreted as a residence and base of operations for a trapper. While not as lucrative as other occupations such as buffalo hunting, trading, and freighting, trapping still provided a way to profit from the prairie. This hand-hewn cottonwood log cabin originally stood near the Chisholm Trail, several miles south of what is now present-day Clearwater, Kansas. It was built around 1865 on the bank of the Ninscal River by an unknown individual. The Munger House symbolizes the pivotal shift from a collection of unincorporated dwellings to the establishment of a formal city. In 1868, Darius S. Munger of Topeka was sent by the Wichita Town Company to lay the groundwork for the town of Wichita. Though others had settled in the area, Munger's efforts marked the first organized attempt to build a town. In 1869, he completed this 1.5-story residence on land near what is now 9th and Waco Street in downtown Wichita. The structure is recognized as Wichita's first substantial building. Constructed using hand-hewn cottonwood logs from the riverbank area with walnut floors and original plaster still visible on the second floor, the house's hardware and windows were freighted from Emporia, Kansas. A log barn once stood between the house and the river. Munger's residence played a multifaceted role in the growing town, serving as a post office, a boarding house, a meeting place, and an office for the Justice of the Peace. In 1874, W.C. Woodman, Wichita's first banker and an early entrepreneur, purchased the Munger House. Woodman enlarged and renovated the structure and incorporated it into a Victorian home he named Lakeside Mansion. The Finlay Ross Furniture Store showcases a business dedicated to outfitting Victorian-era homes. Rather than adhering to a single Victorian style, this store offered a diverse array of styles reflecting both the changing taste of Queen Victoria and the evolving Victorian era. The Industrial Revolution marked a significant shift in furniture production, transitioning from handcrafted pieces to mass-produced items. This change made a variety of styles and qualities accessible to the growing middle class, eager to embrace the opulent trends of the time. With larger families and increased social gatherings, there was a heightened demand for furniture, leading to rooms filled with elaborate furnishings, as we see inside this store. When Finlay Ross Furniture opened its doors at the corner of Main and First Street in late 1876, it quickly distinguished itself by continually enhancing its offerings. The store sold a wide range of items from cradles and caskets to sofas and sewing machines. Customers could also order custom-made furniture from large cities like Kansas City, and they were ordered via telegraph with next-day shipping available, kind of like the Amazon of the past days. Upholstered pieces came with fabric samples for selection. Originally from Canada, Finlay Ross settled in Wichita and became a prominent figure in the community, not only as a successful furniture retailer, but also as the city's mayor from 1897 to 1900, and again from 1905 to 1906.
Hi. Thank you.
The Harness and Saddle Shop highlights a vital element of Wichita's 1870s transportation system. Saddles and harnesses were essential for cowboys, farmers, and townspeople, supporting their daily activities and the growing economy. The shop provided crucial items such as saddles, bridles, and harnesses, as well as leather straps, buckles, hooks, and other hardware necessary for repairs. Wagon freighting was a significant business in early Wichita, with the city's economy relying heavily on goods transported from the industrialized East. Items like hides, machinery, and groceries were shipped in long trains of wagons moving to and from Wichita. Even after the railroad arrived in 1872, team-drawn vehicles continued to be essential for transporting people and goods to outlying areas and between local establishments. The demand for saddle and harness services did not diminish with the arrival of the railroad. Instead, it grew in tandem with the city's industrial and population expansion throughout the 1870s. By 1875, the four saddle and harness shops in Wichita collectively earned a net profit of about $47,000, a huge sum for that time. The Baldwin Photographic Gallery represents a key aspect of Wichita's social and cultural life in the 1870s. Nereus Baldwin, one of the city's earliest photographers, not only captured images of Wichita, but also advertised his collection of stereoscopic views of the city. As Wichita's residential community grew, leisure, social, and cultural pursuits became increasingly important, and residents and promoters sought to highlight the city's progress. Baldwin's gallery was more than just a photography studio, though. It also served as a venue for cultural enrichment. He entertained locals with his refracting telescope and maintained a correspondence with newspapers about intriguing astronomical events. The dressmaking and millinery exhibit that we're about to see highlight the pivotal role women played in early Wichita's fashion industry. In a time when societal norms limited women's careers to domestic roles, dressmaking and millinery provided viable career paths for single women as well as married women. By 1878, Wichita's population of about 4,000 included at least 47 businesses run by women, with over half of these businesses in seamstressing, dressmaking, millinery, as well as hairdressing. Other common occupations for women included laundresses, boarding house operators, as well as music teachers. The skill of seamstresses was highly valued due to the need for form-fitting clothing tailored to individual sizes. Standardized sizes were not yet practical, so each garment had to be custom-made. While sewing machines revolutionized the process for farm and middle-class women who made their own clothing, dressmakers continued to handle the intricate handwork. The elaborate designs of the period's fashions demanded a high level of expertise. Milliners who crafted and styled hats were also crucial, as hat and hairstyle trends changed rapidly in the 1870s. Many milliners also worked as hairdressers, skillfully integrating hats and hairstyles to achieve the latest fashion trends. The first Arkansas Valley Bank, situated here along Main Street in the old Cowtown Museum, symbolizes the vital role financial institutions played in Wichita's growth during the 1870s. William Woodman, an experienced merchant who relocated from Illinois to Wichita in 1870, initially opened a general store. As his transactions grew and his wealth increased, he established the first Arkansas Valley Bank, which notably issued the county's first mortgage. Woodman remained in the banking industry until his death. Banks were crucial for town development, providing essential capital for both urban and rural expansion. However, they also became a point of contention between Wichita and Sedgwick County. As mechanized farming advanced, substantial investment was needed for land, machinery, and expansion. Farmers faced numerous challenges, including unpredictable weather, drought, floods, locust infestations, and adapting to a new growing condition in what was once called the Great American Desert. They often felt burdened by high interest rates compared to city dwellers and resented the high shipping fees imposed by the single railroad. These grievances contributed to the rise of what was called the Grange, a political organization advocating for farmers' interests at local, state, and national levels. The mortgage system was particularly unfair to farmers who compared their borrowing conditions unfavorably with those of cattle brokers in Wichita. Local farmers often faced annual mortgage interest rates of between 30 and 60%, while non-resident cattlemen secured loans as low with rates as 4%. The booming cattle industry, driven by entrepreneurs like Joseph G. McCoy, was perceived as a more lucrative investment, leading to a disparity in financial treatment between cattlemen and frontier farmers. Rural residents, despite their importance, were often seen as secondary to the interest of the cattle trade. We're now heading to a representation of a jailhouse which marks Wichita's transition to a more organized law enforcement system. Built in the summer of 1871, Wichita's first city jail, often referred to as the Calaboose, was constructed from flat-laid cottonwood 2x6s that were nailed together with square nails. Its modest size and construction indicate it was not intended for long-term incarceration. The jail primarily served as a temporary holding facility for individuals involved in public disturbances such as drunkenness and rowdiness. It functioned as a cooling-off tank for those whose behavior had crossed community standards. To maintain a degree of propriety, the jail was often situated from other buildings, shielding the sensibilities of local women from the rowdy cowboys who frequented the area. Initially, the jail featured solid wood doors, which were later replaced with metal bars. Now ready to head into the general store, which represents the foundation, mercantile, and banking functions of early Wichita. Before we enter, kind of think of this as the Walmart of its day. Prior to the arrival of railroad service in 1872, general stores were the primary source for all types of groceries and dry goods in the city. They provided a wide range of essentials reflecting the needs of 1870s Wichita. These general stores were stocked with everything from shotguns to coffins, including vegetable seeds, chairs, various soaps, pipes, pills, tonics, notepaper, pens, garden tools, candles, and lamps. With the arrival of the railroad, general stores expanded their inventory to include goods available from across the United States. Over time, the railroad also enabled the growth of specialized retail businesses, gradually reducing the central role of the general store in Wichita's commerce. Additionally, general stores often served as precursors to the banking industry in Wichita. Given that cash and coin were not always accessible, store owners often allowed customers to buy on credit with payment due at the end of the month or after the harvest. The credit and bookkeeping practices of general store merchants naturally evolved into the development of banking institutions in the city. We're now headed into the Thomas Shaw Music Store. This music store represents a valuable opportunity to address a growing cultural need in the city of Wichita. Music plays a crucial role in both public and private community life. Publicly, it was used to serenade cowboys, celebrate the arrival of the railroad, and encourage patrons in saloons to spend even more money. Traveling troupes and local groups performed a variety of musical genres, including classical music, opera, and minstrel shows. In Victorian homes, music often centered around the parlor, though front porch performances were also common. Young women were typically trained to play an instrument, ideally the parlor organ or the piano. Music was considered essential for civilization and personal well-being, and parlor organs were favored for their durability and minimal tuning requirements. In response to Rivalstown's claim, Marshall Murdoch noted that by 1873, Wichita was celebrated as a highly musical city. Without electronic transmission or digital media that we have today, residents relied on sheet music, which was available through newspapers, periodicals, and standalone publications. Opened in 1884, the Thomas Shaw Music Store started out on Douglas Street, then moved to Main Street before moving here to the old Cowtown Museum. It gained a national reputation as one of the finest music stores in the West. Shaw also founded one of Wichita's earliest orchestras and earned the title as the Music Man of Wichita. We're now heading into the agricultural district of the Old Cowtown Museum, and we're seeing here in front of us the land that represents the DeVore Farm. This farm exemplifies the achievements of an upper-middle-class progressive farmer who leveraged advancements in science, technology, and economic practices to elevate his standing and grow his farm. Along the way, we'll see some of the implements and crops that the DeVore family grew, as well as some of the barns and implements needed to run a progressive farm during the 1870s. We're now headed into a farmhouse, which represents the lifestyle of the farming community in the early 1870s in Wichita. Guests would enter, as we do today, from the porch into the working areas of the house, which would have been considered socially unconventional by most Victorians of the day. The kitchen features an advanced coal-burning stove, mirrored reflective oil lamps, as well as various hand-powered conveniences for making food. In the dining room, this is where the family would gather for meals with occasional formal dinners. The room includes a marble-topped buffet, which reflects the family's growing status. We're now heading into the sitting room. This space would serve as a family gathering area for relaxation and socializing with neighbors and family. As in this room, many of the farm homes in this area of Kansas would have featured a parlor organ for music, stereoscopes to look at pictures, cast iron toys, and farm journals to read. A mansard-style stove that we see provides a small, effective fire for heating the room during the cold winter months. The bedrooms for this house were generally on the upper floors, on the second floor. In fact, there's stairs that lead to 3 bedrooms on the second floor of this home. One for the parents and babies, one for the girls, and one for the boys. The size of the rooms that we would have seen in this house indicate the relative wealth of this farm family. All bedrooms, though, were unheated in the winter months, so blankets and quilts were often needed to keep warm during those cold Kansas winters. As we head out of the agricultural district and moved into the industrial area of the old Cowtown Museum, our first stop is the Scale House and Grain Elevator. These two buildings highlight the significance of agriculture in Sedgwick County and the rise of agribusiness in Wichita. As farming transitioned from subsistence to industrial scale production, farmers required a dedicated place to store large quantities of grain until it could be sold. Grain wagons were first weighed on a wooden platform at the scale house before unloading at the elevator. The process involved weighing the loaded wagon on the platform scale, recording the weight, and then weighing it again after the grain had been unloaded. The difference between the two weights determined the crop weight for which the farmer would be paid, as grains are sold by weight per bushel. Farmers also had the option to store their grain for future sale, though this required paying a storage fee. During the harvest season in the late 1870s, Wichita streets were crowded with horse-drawn wagons filled with grain, waiting their turn to unload at one of the city's 8 grain elevators. The process involved weighing the grain, then driving them up the west ramp into the elevator. The grain was then unloaded and lifted to the top of the building where it was distributed into bins. Railroad cars located beside the elevator were then filled by gravity from these bins. Farmers purchasing grain drove their wagons inside to be loaded via a canvas chute from the overhead bins. Grain elevators were among the earliest industrial applications of steam power. However, to mitigate the risk of grain dust explosions, these plants were often housed in separate buildings away from the elevators. High storage costs and expensive railroad freight charges contributed to the emergence of what was called the Grange movement and increased political activism among farmers. This 50-foot tall grain elevator that we see is a great representation of rural air elevators from this era. We're now headed towards the Santa Fe Depot, which illustrates the transformative impact of the railroad on Wichita and Sedgwick County during the 1870s. To become a key player in the Texas cattle trade, Wichita needed to establish itself as a railhead, a hub where cowboys could bring their herds to market and transport them eastward. Many towns vied for this crucial role, and speculation about rail routes filled the newspapers. While awaiting the settlement of Osage land, the Santa Fe Railroad bypassed Wichita. In response, local citizens pooled their resources and issued county bonds to construct their own railroad, linking up with the Santa Fe line 20 miles north of here in Newton, Kansas. This new railroad connection brought a lifeline to Wichita, facilitating the flow of goods, services, and settlers, as well as enabling the shipment of farm products, cattle, and finished goods. It also provided efficient transportation for the city's residents. The arrival of the telegraph alongside the railroad further enhanced communication. Initially designed to aid in coordinating and monitoring trains, the telegraph soon proved to be invaluable for distributing national news, transmitting information faster than mail carried by stagecoach, and conducting business across the country. Together, the railroad and telegraph spurred economic growth in Wichita. This herb area that we see highlights the natural bounty of the prairie for both healing and culinary uses. Herbal healing is an ancient practice that laid the foundation for modern pharmacology. Immigrants like the Wolf family, in whose home we're going to be entering here in just a second, who came from Germany, brought their herbal knowledge to America and merged it with local herbal traditions learned from Native Americans. They believed in the spirit of the plant as the source of healing rather than the plant itself. The Shakers were pioneers in the mass cultivation and commercialization of herbs and seeds. Their success in harvesting and selling herbs rather than using them solely for personal health inspired others to explore wildcrafting, which is the practice of harvesting wild herbs. As settlers like the Wolf family sought cash crops to supplement their income during westward expansion, selling herbs became a practical choice. Local drugstores would logically stock these raw materials for medicinal products. We're now entering the Wolf House itself, which is representative of a typical dwelling on the outskirts of town where new immigrants might have lived as they began their lives on the frontier. Many immigrants found this area promising for establishing a homestead, often arriving with limited resources to start anew. This house portrays a German family reflecting the largest foreign nationality to settle in Wichita. Their community contributed significantly to the town's social and economic fabric. This house was built in 1883 by German immigrant Henry Wolf, who arrived in Galesburg Township in Kingman County just after the Civil War ended in 1865. Wolf, a farmer who had one of the finest farms in the area, supplemented his farming income by working as a cobbler during the winter months. The livery stable exemplifies the vital role of transportation, communication, and economic development in Wichita and Sedgwick County during the 1870s. Livery stables were essential to early Wichita's transportation infrastructure. These commercially operated facilities provided boarding and rental services for horses, mules, and vehicles. Visitors arriving in town on horseback or in horse-drawn rigs could board their animals and vehicles at the stable for as long as needed. The stables also sold feed for the animals. The livery stable rented out saddle horses, teams, and wagons to those arriving by stagecoach or train, as well as to Wichita's residences. Contrary to the common belief that most people in the 1870s owned their own horse and buggy, the reality was that many could not afford the upkeep of horse, including the cost of stable, regular feeding, and daily care. As a result, most townspeople walked or used the stagecoach for travel. For those who needed transportation, renting a mount or a carriage from a livery stable was a practical solution. Inside the livery stable, we see a longhorn cow. At the end of the Civil War, with beef supplies in the East depleted due to the demands of feeding soldiers on both sides, America sought a new source of beef. The Texas Longhorn, which had its origins in Spain, had been largely neglected during the war and had reproduced rapidly. Despite its lean and stringy meat, it was still beef, and that was what the public wanted. However, with no rail system extending into Texas, the only way to transport these cattle east and west was by trailing them overland. A significant problem arose when the Longhorns came into contact with farms raising shorthorn cattle. The Longhorns carried a tick that could transmit what was called Texas tick fever to shorthorns, a disease that was nearly always fatal. To protect their livestock, farmers petitioned the Topeka legislature to shift the north-south quarantine line from Sedgwick County. As a result, no Longhorns could be found east of this line without risking a hefty fine. The shorthorn cattle were thus spared from the disease, but they were soon replaced by the white-faced Hereford cattle, which did not carry the same risk. We're now heading into Masonic Hall. This hall represents the Freemasons, a civic and social organization comprising of men from various occupations in the region. The Masons gathered to discuss local news and ideas for improving their town and the surrounding area. The first Wichita Lodge was chartered in the 1870s, and many of the prominent early citizens were Masons. They held their meetings in a building known as the Masonic Lodge Hall. The sign on the building features the symbols of the Masons, the square and the compass. These symbols represent integrity and virtue, reflecting the tools used by operative Masons. The letter G, often found within the symbol, stands for both God and geometry. Inside, as we can see, inside the Masonic Hall, It will highlight two major branches of Freemasonry, including the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. We're now heading inside Turnverein Hall. This hall symbolizes the efforts of Wichita's expanding metropolitan community to establish social and cultural organizations in the early days of the city. As the largest ethnic group in Wichita, Germans were active in business, politics, and social life. The Turner Society, a German fraternal organization, was a notable group that included many prominent members of the city's German community. The term Turnverein is a German word meaning club of turners or gymnast. This exercise union focused on physical fitness, offering exercise classes and organizing social events like dances. In fact, above the door you can see their motto, which reads, "Alert, happy, and free are the courageous sons of the gymnastics movement." The Turners introduced their society to Wichita with a grand hall, emphasizing their goals of developing strength, encouraging truth, protecting justice, and guarding liberty. To fulfill their commitment to enriching the community, the society sponsored public concerts, dances, balls, as well as athletic displays. The Turners thrived until anti-German sentiment during World War I in the early 1900s led many members to minimize their German heritage. The next building we're going into is the Southern Hotel, which represents the crucial role hotels played in Wichita's promotion and growth in the 1870s. Built on the first block of North Main Street, it was the fourth hotel in Wichita and the second constructed of wood frame. Though its existence was brief, it was an important fixture in the rapidly developing town, serving between 18 to 30 guests daily in its original 15 rooms. We're now entering the first floor of the building. These hotels, like the Southern, provided essential services to a diverse clientele from immigrants and business people to cattle traders. They offered dormitory-style rooms for short-term guests and private rooms for longer stays, catering to the needs of both transient as well as permanent residents. Hotels often tested new inventions in domestic conveniences. For instance, the Occidental Hotel featured fine ingrained carpets, spring beds, stylish bedstands, washstands, mirrors, lounges, and full chamber sets with chandeliers illuminating the carpeted halls. In addition to their role as lodgings, hotels were known for their high-quality food and elegant atmosphere. The menu at the hotel's opening would often include such things as oysters, a stuffed pig, tame duck with olives, boiled ham, pickled tongue, lobster salad, and over 20 desserts. The luxurious decor and abundant food served to counter the perception of Wichita as a barren frontier outpost lacking in social amenities. By 1874, Wichita boasted 10 hotels that collectively conducted over $368,000 in business. These establishments would often have hosted balls, banquets, and other community events of social significance. During the cattle trade era from 1872 to 1876, hotels became central hubs for cattle trading and served as makeshift seats for city and county governments due to the lack of public buildings. As we go up into the upper floors, we see representations of what some of the rooms, both dormitory style and private rooms, would have looked like. Saloons played a pivotal role in Wichita's economy and social life during the cattle trade era of the 1870s. The one we're headed into today is the Fritz Schnitzler Saloon. In 1872, Wichita was home to 14 saloons which could serve various functions from family dining to drinking and gambling. Despite their controversial nature, many townspeople disapproved of these establishments. The temperance movement, supported by the First Presbyterian Church, gained momentum in the late 1870s, advocating for stricter regulation of such businesses. The city government, recognizing the economic benefits brought by saloons, chose to regulate and tax them, thus profiting from the booming cattle trade. Across the street from the saloon and the hotel, we're now moving in and taking a look at the business district of Old Cowtown Museum. And the first place that we're going to go into is the meat market. In the 19th century America, meat was a staple of nearly every meal, with beef, pork, poultry, and fish being common on local menus. The demand for meat was high, and specialty items like oysters were also popular. Professional hunting played a crucial role in Wichita's early economy. Hunters supplied local meat markets with a variety of wild game, including buffalo, elk, deer, antelope, and game birds like duck and geese. Additionally, fish from the Arkansas River was an important part of the local diet. Meat and game were shipped from Wichita to eastern markets using insulated railroad cars, which were cooled with blocks of ice. Oysters, on the other hand, were shipped from the East Coast on express trains that took about 4 to 5 days. They were packed in barrels with layers of ice and straw, ensuring they arrived alive and edible. As the vast herds of buffalo and wild game diminished and their habitats were replaced by farms and towns, the reliance on domesticated animals from the growing agrarian economy of Sedgwick County increased. The Marshal's Office showcases the evolution of law enforcement in Wichita. In 1870, Wichita, then a second-class city with a population of about 2,000, established its first formal police force. The newly formed city council appointed Ike Walker as the first marshal. He was succeeded by William Smith, who resigned after just 2 days, leading to Mike Mager's appointment. Mager served effectively for 3 years. The influx of cattle herds heading north to Abilene influenced Wichita's early ordinances. By 1872, Wichita, now a significant trading center and rail terminus, was emerging as a key player among Kansas cattle towns. It shortened the cattle drive by 90 miles compared to previous destinations like Abilene and Ellsworth. The transition to a cattle town, though, brought new challenges to law enforcement. Wichita maintained a 5-person police force throughout much of the 1870s, which expanded with special police during cattle season to manage the increased activity. To maintain order without discouraging the cowboys, the city had to balance enforcement with hospitality. Another issue in the town was prostitution. Though illegal, it was regulated through fines, effectively functioning as a licensed system. Brothel owners and workers paid to operate, with the police enforcing these regulations. Wyatt Earp, perhaps Wichita's most famous law enforcement figure, served as an assistant marshal and special policeman. His duties included peacekeeping, debt collection, sidewalk repairs, as well as stray dog control. This next building we're entering is the blacksmith shop, which was a vital component of Wichita's economy during the 1870s, particularly in agricultural equipment repair. The blacksmith's trade was crucial to the early settlement of Wichita. Before the arrival of railroad service in 1872, blacksmiths were essential for production and repair, providing necessary tools, farm equipment, and hardware in the absence of affordable continuous supplies. With the advent of the railroad, the role of blacksmiths evolved. Railroads introduced mass-produced factory manufactured goods, expanding Wichita's industrial base to include foundries, wagon, and farm equipment manufacturers. We're now headed into the J.P. Allen Drugstore. This drugstore embodies the formal health practices of the 1870s in Wichita. This establishment highlights the evolving relationship between scientific medicine and pharmacy during the period, exemplified by the shared ownership of the building by the Allen brothers. As we enter the building, we'll be on the ground floor, which was actually the biggest part of the drugstore. It was managed by J.P. Allen and features a variety of goods, including patent medicines, liquors, paints, window glass, and other medicinal supplies. The front retail area showcases these products, along with the soda fountain serving carbonated health drinks. The back section of the drugstore, when we walk through that area, contains a prescription lab equipped with a red glass screen to keep the drug formulations confidential from customers.
Yeah.
As we head upstairs, we will take a look at what was once Dr. Fabrique's office and dental practice. The medicine or the medical field of the late 19th century was still in its very formative stages, with many practices being inconsistent as well as being unregulated. Physicians like Dr. Allen and Dr. Fabrique faced significant challenges contending with home remedies and patent medicines while advocating for more scientific approaches to medicine. We're taking a look at here right now the dental office. Dentistry was transitioning from rudimentary tooth pulling techniques to more scientific methods. The foot-powered dentist drill positioned centrally by the patient chair reflects the era's technological limitations. Without electricity, dentists relied on a steady foot rhythm and natural or kerosene lighting to help them see what they were doing. The land office represents the early processes of land transfer and distribution in Wichita and Sedgwick County. Between 1865 and 1880, two types of land offices operated in Wichita: private real estate firms and a U.S. land office. Both were involved in selling government land. These land agents not only facilitated land transactions, but also welcomed new immigrants, promoting the land to prospective buyers. They showcased the value of the land by displaying corn, wheat, garden produce, and the quality of the tall grass prairie hay and game animals in their offices. The barbershop symbolizes a key business and social institution of the expanding Wichita community in the 1870s. Often referred to as shaving saloons, these establishments served not just as grooming centers but as social hubs for men. Barbershops were exclusively male spaces reflecting the social norms of the time. Women typically did not visit these establishments as they were associated with male-only activities like political discussions, business talk, and rowdy conversations. The atmosphere often resembled that of a men's club, complete with swearing, jokes, and tall tales. Barbers often worked 6 days a week, including early Sunday mornings for pre-church shaves. Locals visited once or twice a week for a shave and have their boots polished by an apprentice. A bath would cost 50 cents, which was equivalent to a half day's pay for a cowboy. Right next door to the barber shop is a law office, which gives us an idea of what legal practices were like during 1870s in Wichita. By 1872, there were at least 17 lawyers in the Wichita area, although many practiced part-time and often needed additional jobs to support themselves, a common practice nationwide at that time. Next door to the law office is the Fidsheimer clothing store. This store reflects the expansion of mercantile businesses, technological advances, as well as what Jewish immigration to Wichita was like during the 1870s. Fidsheimer's clothing store was a specialty mercantile, distinguishing itself from the traditional general store by focusing exclusively on clothing. The arrival of the railroad in Wichita in 1872 enabled businesses like Fidsheimer's to cater to the growing metropolitan community with a steady supply of specialty clothing, tailored goods, and high-quality fabrics for the latest fashions. During this period, men's clothing was increasingly available in standard sizes due to mass production, while women's clothing was still custom tailored, as we saw in the dressmaking store earlier. Next to the clothing store that we saw is the Wichita Eagle, which represents the office and printing business of Marshall M. Murdoch, founder and editor of the Wichita City Eagle. This newspaper was one of the first published in Wichita and has been in continuous operation ever since. In 1872, Murdoch sold his newspaper business in Burlingame, Kansas, and relocated to Wichita, lured by the city's potential and the anticipated arrival of the Santa Fe Railroad. Murdoch was a fervent advocate for Wichita, using his newspaper to highlight the benefits of life in this western frontier town. His efforts attracted settlers and speculators by portraying Wichita as a haven of civility. Murdoch played a pivotal role in transforming the frontier settlement into a thriving city. Upon Murdoch's death in 1908, his wife, Victoria Murdoch, took over the ownership of the Eagle, becoming one of the few women publishers of a major daily newspaper at the time. Under her leadership, the Eagle had the largest circulation in Kansas. The Gill Mortuary represents the evolving practices surrounding death and funerals in Wichita during the 1870s. Prior to the Civil War, funeral arrangements were typically managed by families, with neighbors and relatives helping to prepare the body and provide support. Funerals were community events where the deceased was usually displayed in the family home, often on a wooden board, or what was called a cooling board, with ice placed underneath to preserve the body. The parlor would be decorated with flowers to mask any unpleasant odors, and after a period of viewing, a minister would conduct a service that included scripture readings and prayers. In the 1870s, with westward expansion and the weakening of extended family networks, the role of undertakers became increasingly significant. Funeral practices began to shift from family-managed to professional services. Local undertakers, many of whom started as cabinet makers, began to provide comprehensive funeral services, including caskets, clothing, as well as hearses. The use of dedicated funeral homes or parlors became more common, though these were not widespread until the 1880s. One of the more important businesses in the 1870s was a carpenter, and this shop represents what a carpenter shop looked like at that time. A finished carpenter required significant skill and experience, handling custom work such as furniture, doors, window frames, decorative trim, and both exterior and interior molding for homes and buildings. These artisans played a crucial role in crafting detailed woodwork and finishing touches that defined the quality and aesthetic of each building. In addition to their primary work, though, finished carpenters and cabinet makers often provided undertakers with coffins and other wooden necessities. During the 1870s, the carpentering trade was diverse and very much in high demand, encompassing day labor carpenters, contract builders, lumberyard operators, and planing mill workers. By the 19th century standards, wages in this trade were very high. This one-room schoolhouse represents the educational institutions of Wichita during the 1870s and provides some great insight into the community's early schooling practices. This one-room schoolhouse, while not typical of Wichita schools, reflects the numerous one-room schools found throughout rural America during this period. Initially, classes in Wichita were held by William Finn in an abandoned sod dugout, charging a subscription fee of $1 per pupil. In 1871, Wichita allocated $5,000 from a school bond issue to construct a wood frame building with land donated by James R. Mead. However, the city's school system struggled to keep pace with the expanding population throughout the 1870s. Existing buildings often extended rather than replaced, and some schools even used the upper floors of businesses. This led to complaints about inadequate facilities, including insufficient outhouses and disruptive street noise. This schoolhouse that we're looking at today was originally built in Wichita about 1910 and served as a temporary classroom for several years. After its use as a school ended, local donors furnished the building with period desks, books, and maps, transforming it into the country school museum that we see today. This story and a half house is a great example of a late 19th century lower to middle class home. This exhibit in this home provides a glimpse into family life in Wichita during the 1870s, a period following the arrival of the railroad in 1872. As we enter the home, the first room that we go to is the parlor, which is located just inside the front door, and it was the primary space for receiving guests and showcasing the family's public image. The parlors would often feature the finest furnishings and was kept pristine for visitors to come and see. Although this room was used frequently by the family, it remained the most carefully maintained space in the house. As we move away from the parlor, we go into what was called a middle room, which had multiple functions, including use as a dining room, a sewing room, as well as leisure activities. Its versatility is evident from the fold-down table and the presence of children's toys and school books. This room connected to the stairway, which led to two small rooms on the upper floor, one for children and one for the parents. Also on the ground floor is the kitchen, and it's a pretty small kitchen, but it represents the challenges that were faced in 19th century cooking. With limited space and harsh weather conditions, preparing meals was often a very arduous process. The wood-burning stove served both as cooking as well as heating of the home, while cooking needs were met by storing food in a cellar, well, or on the back porch during the winter months. The Murdoch house that we see here is a step above the story and a half house that we saw, as this house fits into a more comfortable middle-class Victorian home represented in the 1870s in Wichita. The home that we're looking at and walking through today was constructed in 1874 and was the residence of Marshall M. Murdoch, founder and editor of the Wichita City Eagle, and his wife Victoria and 3 children. This house, which originally was at 4th and Oak Street in downtown Wichita, served as the Murdoch's family home and as a hub for social and political gatherings. As a prominent publicist and local promoter of Wichita, Colonel Murdoch, along with his wife Victoria, who was both a supportive spouse as well as very active in civic projects herself, hosted many distinguished guests. Known as Eaglehurst, their home became a venue for influential figures due to Murdoch's businesses and political connections. Architecturally, this house is a great example of the Gothic Revival style, which is characterized by its steeply pitched gable roof, ornate cresting, and intricate woodwork that we see throughout as we go through the rooms. It stands as one of the most stylish upper middle class homes that you'll see here on the museum grounds. Our final stop on our tour here at the Old Cowtown Museum in Wichita is the First Presbyterian Church. Built in 1870 at the intersection of Wichita and 2nd Streets for about $1,500, the First Presbyterian Church was the town's first permanent church structure. I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks of Wonder tour here at the Old Cowtown Museum in Wichita, Kansas. Leave a comment if you've learned one thing that you didn't know about Old Town Wichita or life in the 1870s. Also, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Take care now. Bye-bye.